Hello, Michael Swain here after Kansas basketball's 74-57 loss to Iowa State here inside of Hilton Coliseum. And I feel like we got a lot to talk about in this post-game video. A very interesting performance from Kansas. I think some of the concerns that if you're following the team right now, if you're covering it like myself, you kind of had these concerns, and I think some of them surfaced again here in Ames. Before we dive into, I think the Kansas specific stuff, I think you got to tip your hat to Iowa State, right? This is a really good team, rightfully the number 2 team in the country and considered, one of the best all-around teams in the country. They're down a starter, and yet they've got guys that can come off the bench and play really well. And someone like Curtis Jones, right, did just that today. And a game like this, right, you can talk about Kansas, some of the issues they have, and while also keeping the context that this is a really good Iowa State basketball team. And I think probably a team that could go on to win the Big 12. If you look at their schedule, it's pretty favorable from here on out. They've gotten some of their big games out of the way. So that's something I think I want to say off the top before we get into this. Now, we can talk about Kansas, because I think if you had concerns about Kansas and its ability to go win elite road games, those questions you had going into the game, right? Does Kansas have the shot making? Does Kansas have the ability to overcome big runs from another team? Can Kansas execute consistently against high pressure teams? The answer to a lot of those things are no. And again, it comes back to, I think, some of the similar issues we've seen for 2 years now for KU in some of these tough road games. There is not a stopper. KU struggles to stop the other team from going on runs, and that can show up in a few different ways, right? Obviously in the first half, Curtis Jones was going crazy, and there's not much Kansas could have done, I think. But at the same time, right, there is an inability, I think, for KU to maintain that intensity to guard for consistent stretches. And I think, and I've wrote about this, right, I think defense was becoming Kansas' identity. A game like this makes you rethink that a little bit because of the amount of mistakes that Kansas made defensively. And for this team, right now the offense is a slog, right? You go back to since the start of the new year, KU entered this game with the number 100 ranked offense in Torvik, right? That's not good. And why is that? Well, I think, if you're watching the games like I am, right, you can see it. KU has to work so hard to get open shots. They have to play with such high intensity and high effort that when you play in a road game like this and that energy gets zapped by the opposing crowd and by the opposing team playing the style of basketball that Iowa State plays, it's really hard to overcome that. And that's a big issue I think I see with this team right now. And shoot, it's something Devon Dotson tweeted, right? Kansas does not have an end-of-game killer. That's his tweet. I think he summed it up pretty well, right? I think the closest guy right now is Zeke Mayo. Where would Kansas be without Zeke Mayo? Not close to its record right now. And he's the one guy in this game, I've got the old stats here, 7 for 19, 17 points. Again, not the most efficient, but man, for a long stretch of the game, he looked like the only guy that could score the basketball at will. And I know he struggled in the second half and all of that, but KU just does not have the shot making. And I think it shows up in a game like this where KU gets taken out of its sets because of the way that Iowa State pressures the ball. And KU's point guard, his inability to create any sort of separation, to finish around the rim, to make free throws in this game. These are just issues that have been there. And I think sometimes, people like myself, you can overlook things, right? You overlook it sometimes when you look at a Cincinnati game. And yes, Cincinnati's great defensively, but for KU, for a lot of that game, it was a slog. And for the long-term future of this team, I have concerns about when KU goes to Baylor, when KU goes to Houston. How do you win those games? It's going to take incredible individual performances, right? Of course, the Elijah Johnson stuff's, going all around social media, right, from his game here. Think back to Devontae Graham, his senior year. You think back to any number of performances, right? You can go back to guys being difference makers. Jalen Wilson, Ochai Agbaji, right? Those guys were huge, big-time players. And who is that player for KU right now that can go get a shot at the end of the shot clock, at the end of the game? When you need to get over the hump, who is that guy? I don't know. I think the closest guy is Zeke Mayo. And that's putting a lot of pressure on him because, again, he would be the only guy I can think of that can go and get his own shot. DeJuan Harris can't, KJ Adams can't. Hunter Dickinson is reliant on his teammates to get him in good positions, and even today, I don't think he was at his best. And so that's a big question. You want to win at the highest level, right? Win the Big 12, win elite top 5 games on the road. KU's going to have more of these this season, and that's a big concern I have is offensively, how can you get it done? And I think if you look at the team, 2 guys that maybe you think theoretically could be shot makers, right? Someone like Rylan Griffin, AJ Storr, it's just not clicked. It's not, AJ Storr, man, like, he got it from himself today. It was the first half, his only minutes. Like, I've not heard, I was sitting right back there, and it happened right behind me right there. Like, you could hear yourself getting frustrated with AJ Storr, and he let him have it and took him out of the game. Then he goes in late in the game and makes some silly mistakes, some silly fouls when Iowa State's in the bonus and you're trying to come back. And then you just play the rest of the game, and it's basically garbage time at that point. Rylan Griffin doesn't play the first 10 minutes of the second half. I think he creates stuff for KU offensively, and so KU's kind of in this conundrum where some of the pieces that are brought in, right, are struggling to fit in with the head coach. And I think some of the guys that, you think about someone like, Diggy Coit, in theory, he provides shot space, floor spacing with his shot making ability. He's not made a 3 in a while, and he struggled, and I thought today he struggled, right? I think Shaq Moore has brought KU some really good things, but again, if you're relying on Shaq Moore for offense, that's a tough thing to ask, right? I don't think he's a guy that you can expect to go knock down threes. And so for KU, the question I think comes back to offense, because defensively, even in a game like this, right, KU's defense wasn't good enough, but they can play with the intensity and energy, right, defensively. They can do well. This is an Iowa State team that's one of the best offenses in the country, and you're not going to play the best offense in the country, or one of the best offenses in the country consistently. And so, for KU, again, you put it all together, right? You play one of the best teams in the country. You don't play your A game. You turn the ball over. You make sloppy mistakes. And there are just concerns you're going to have for when KU goes to play Houston on the road. And like I said, Baylor on the road. KU's not won at Baylor since the Udoka Azubuike, Devon Dotson team. It's been a while. So, long term, you think about Kansas, if they're going to win the Big 12 or compete to be in the Big 12 title, you got to be able to go steal one on the road. And right now, I think the confidence that Kansas can go in and steal one on the road is diminished by a performance like this against a really good Iowa State team. So where does KU go? Look, KU's still going to be in it, right? KU's got to win their home games. Starts against Kansas State. They cannot drop any silly ones on the road. Think about TCU next week, midweek. And then they've got to try and steal one, right? And that comes at a Houston, at a Baylor. Can you try and steal one of those? Because if not, then you're looking at, probably 5 losses, and that's just right now with the way Iowa State looks in their schedule, right? I'm not sure if I see 5 losses for them in the conference. So for KU, it's a precarious position because I think some of the same issues we've seen over the last 12 months, 13, 14 months, if you want to go back to last season, right, all the way back to the start of last season, some of the same issues that are still recurring, and I think some of that comes down to just personnel and minutes and rotation. And is that going to change? I'm not really seeing much there that's going to change. So it's going to be really interesting to see how KU pivots because, it's not trending in the right direction, even though I think KU as a whole has started to find some things that can work in the long run. Games like this, I think, make you step back and pause and think about the big picture of trying to achieve the things that Kansas as a program wants to achieve, right? That's competing deep in the NCAA tournament. That's winning conference titles. You need a very complete team to do those things. And right now, I don't think Kansas is that type of complete team. So those are my thoughts on the game. Obviously, check out the Bill Self post-game press conference. I thought it was interesting. He talked about competitiveness versus effort. He said the effort was good tonight. The competitiveness was not. I think it's a very interesting thing to distinguish. The word escaped me there for a second. So that's what I got. Thanks for watching. As always, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, check out all the content at fog.net. We got you covered here from Ames.